Hey there, bibliophiles and those raising bibliophiles. Thank you for joining me today at Holding Steadfast. And hopefully you will find this week's book review helpful to you as parents. You're trying to find great books for your children to read. And I know how difficult it is kind of navigating what's out there and what's appropriate and not appropriate, especially for our young readers and middle grade readers. So my goal here is to equip you with the information that you need so that you can make the right choice for your readers and which books should be on their to-read list and which ones you may just want to give a pass. So with that, this week's book review is Pages and Company, and it is The Lost Fairy Tales, and this is book 2 in the Pages and Company series. So about a couple years ago, I did book 1, which was The Book Wanderers, and I had a request recently for the second book in the series, so I kind of jumped right in on that, and I'm so glad that I did. It was definitely enjoyable, and I'm going to read a few more in this series. I think there's 6 or 7. So hopefully I'll get to another 1 or 2 of those this year. Definitely lots to read, especially for series books. And that's one of the things with book series that makes me sort of different than maybe some other book reviews that you can access and find out about. Nothing against any of those. But book series I find is a great opportunity where you get the first couple under your belt. And this is not to say that the author here, Anna James, would do anything like that, because I haven't read anything of hers that has done this. But you get some that slowly start to weave things in. Things that as parents you would be shocked, or things you don't want your children reading about, or things that present things in an inappropriate way. And so I definitely do a lot of book series on purpose. And that's just to make parents aware of books that, you know, they start off well, and then you think that like, oh, the first 2 or 3 were great, and so I trust them. But we should definitely exercise way more caution with books in a series than we do with just standalones. And I know that I personally have been burned by book series that I thought were clean and good for my children, only to be horrified later of the stuff that was, you know, presented or slipped in. Whether some of that is the author's choice or some of that is done with publishers, I'm not really sure. But ultimately, at the end of the day, parents, you need the information to decide what's appropriate for your children. So with that being said, I did do book 2, and I'm hoping to do a couple more in a series. And you'll definitely see a lot more books in a series on my channel than you may find in other resources as you're looking for books. So Pages and Company, The Lost Fairy Tales, opens up with the drama of Amelia. She is the head of the underlibrary, and she's losing her position. So just to backtrack a little bit, so into book 1, because it's been a really long time, and if you're here with me, you may not have read that book. You can definitely go to my website, though, at holdingsteadfastreaders.com, and you will find a written review there for that particular book. But the main character, Tilly, her mother had disappeared. But you come to find out that she was trapped in a book. And so in this story, the book wanderers can literally, right, get lost in a book. And so that's a pretty fun aspect of the story that I really enjoy. And so in this book, we're kind of picking up with the after effects of some of that stuff. So Enoch Chalk is the one who trapped Tilly's mom in a book. And so as we're picking up in this, we're going to kind of keep going on. But before I get ahead of myself a little bit, I just want to share with you a little bit of the opening of this book, just to give you an idea of the writing style, the fancifulness that's in here. So the first chapter is called A Little Magic. 5 people proved to be far too many to fit inside a wardrobe. Remind me again why we had to book wander from in here, Tilly asked, face squished uncomfortably close to her granddad's shoulder. As I rather think you know, he replied, we don't technically have to book wander from inside a wardrobe, but it adds effect, don't you think? But he sounded decidedly less sure than when he first suggested the idea half an hour ago. I mean, if the effect you're going for is much closer relationship with each other and our personal hygiene choices, then yes, it does add effect, Oscar said, voice muffled by Grandma's scarf, which was simultaneously tickling his nose and getting fluff in his mouth every time he spoke. I bet the Pevensies didn't have to deal with this, Tilly said. Yes, but they were emptying straight out on the other side of the wardrobe, Grandma said, which does rather give them advantage. Yes, okay, Granddad admitted. It has become abundantly clear that my attempt at a little poetry and whimsy weren't entirely thought through. He shuffled his way back toward the door and shoved it open. Tilly, her best friend Oscar, her 2 grandparents, and her mother all fell, gasping into the cinnamon-scented air of the bookshop. And so that just kind of gives you a little idea of all the characters that are in here, and definitely references like the Pevensies and Narnia in the wardrobe in the story. So a lot of that fun stuff. As you can imagine, with the title The Lost Fairy Tales, in this particular book, we're dealing more with fairy tales than anything else. So Tilly is definitely beyond upset in the fact that Amelia is being removed from her position as head librarian of the underlibrary. And not only that, but she's upset that there's nothing that she can personally do about it. And so her grandparents sent her on a holiday with Oscar to visit his father in France. His parents are divorced, so if you go back and look at my review, you'll see some of that aspect. Her grandparents are hoping that it'll be a delightful change for her, and that Tilly doesn't do any book wandering. That's what they asked her to do. No book wandering while she's gone, to just kind of take a break, let all the dust settle, because there's a lot of tension at the beginning of the story. Unfortunately, other characters, Oscar included, really convince her to defy her grandparents' instructions, which actually almost leads to Oscar's demise. So it's not always good to defy your grandparents. But that is one aspect of the story, just to make parents aware of, that we do have characters who are trying to influence another character to defy authority in her life. Aside from Oscar's attempt to convince Tilly to actually book wander while they're away from London, there is another character introduced in this particular book, and her name is Gretchen. Later revealed in the story, Gretchen used to work closely with Tilly's grandmother at the underlibrary, where they mapped fairy tales together. They ultimately had a falling out, and they hadn't seen each other, or haven't seen each other, in over 30 years in the book. While in France, Tilly and Oscar go to a bookshop where Gretchen is actively encouraging them, also along with Oscar's grandmother, to wander in fairy tales. And in the wandering aspect, Tilly's grandmother, definitely this was something that she explicitly forbid her to do because it was supposedly dangerous. So in my book review that you can find at holdingsteadfastreaders.com, you will find the full written review. I give you some quotes about these interactions and the things that take place. Gretchen is definitely an eccentric character brought in, and she is has her own perspectives and her own ideas, and she's trying to sort of influence the children with that. She's definitely nefarious, because in the end, Gretchen sort of leads ultimately to like how things sort of end in the story. So, and I'll get to that in a second. I'm just kind of getting ahead of myself. Tilly and Oscar, while they are book wandering in fairy tales, things do get dangerous. Oscar almost gets sort of stuck and trapped there. They do manage to make it back to the underlibrary in France, and they're talking with 2 other librarians there who actually are familiar with Gretchen. And so they do make a mention that she's had many love affairs in books, and that they make a reference to just some other stuff about her and her ideas. Definitely check out my book review, written response right up for that, to just kind of give you some more details about that, so you can make good choices for your children. There are some good quotes in this book. One of them that I really liked is early on in the story. It says, "Words can mean much more or less than they seem. We can put them in such creative uses." And so you can kind of see this idea of words and their values and how they can be used and manipulated. Tilly is also exploring in this story the legitimacy of the archivists. She's hoping that they'll kind of swoop in and save the day of everything going on, but not everybody believes that the archivists exist. One lady says that they're just a story to help provide hope. And so you can see some parallels or some allusions that these ideas might connect to. Definitely, if you are considering this book for your reader, and I did enjoy it, but I do want to caution parents to definitely check out chapter 21, definitely page 181. Gretchen speaks more openly about her past with Tilly and Oscar in this particular page in this chapter. She mentions her own escapades of falling in love with fictional characters. She even states, that she's been taken to dinner by several iconic heroes and heroines in her time. Could be innocuous in the way that that's presented. It could mean something a little bit more. I just want to let parents know so that way you can make your own interpretation of how you want to read that. In chapter 22, Tilly calls her grandparents and she tells them the truth, that she's been book wandering while she was in France. But because of Gretchen's influence on her previously, she's really hateful towards her grandparents, and she starts to defend Gretchen. And then her grandparents are rightfully concerned about the influence that Gretchen is having on them. But we do see her attitude shift in Tilly. Unfortunately, it does turn around. I know we have, it's very typical teenage behavior, wanting to push the boundaries and rebel in little ways. So you definitely see that in the story. Unfortunately, Tilly's mom, Bea, does a very good job of helping to bring Tilly back around and showing her that Gretchen doesn't really care for her the way that her grandparents do. And so she needs to take that into consideration about things. And then, like I was mentioning earlier, in chapter 27, you'll definitely see Gretchen use her manipulation to get the children to go back into the fairy tales. And Gretchen thinks that by doing so, they're actually going to save the fairy tales. But this is actually where the villains of the story, one of which is currently the new appointed head of the Underlibrary, is seeking to basically become immortal. And so they're using the children for that. And so things don't end so well with Gretchen in that. Ultimately, overall, I didn't really care for Gretchen's character, but I think it was an important character to remind parents who are hopefully reading this before giving the book to their reader or listening to this review, to have conversations with your children about the purpose of boundaries that we set in their lives and their need to honor that authority and that trust that parents, we're looking out for our children. We're not trying to stifle them, but that there's a lot of stuff in the world that they just don't understand. And so we do see Gretchen as a reminder to listen to your parents, that there's a reason, that they love you, they care for you. But as a parent, if you were going to give this to your child, I just want you to be aware of that aspect in there so you can make sure to follow up with your reader with those conversations. There are people out there who definitely want to undermine parental authority and harming children with ideas and opportunities that really aren't the best for them. Book 2 is definitely engaging for readers. They're going to be quickly whisked away into a fantasy world. I know that I was, and I'm definitely ready for book 3. So hopefully all this information is helpful to you out there, parents, that you can make the choices that are appropriate for your readers. And I hope that you will join me next week for another book review.